to thank Altman for inviting me here. I wanted to share some of our experience in China and some of my thoughts. So first, China's challenges. So actually, I just quote from our chairman, Xi Jinping, our economy, our development model is unbalanced, uncoordinated, and unsustainable. We burn as much as coal as the rest of the world, and we're now the biggest carbon emitter. I just read from the newspaper that even our per capita emission right now is 7 tons per capita. It's already exceeding the world average. And also the problem for us is most our concern that we have is we have a big local air pollution. So rising death toll due to the local air pollution. Based on the World Bank report, we have every year we have 750,000 excess deaths per year. And a recent paper by my colleague on the PNS, they estimate because of this mandatory heating in China, so the people who live in the north were loss of expected life expectancy for 5 years compared to the southern people. And just a few months ago, that our new leadership has some kind of a blueprint for the environmental policy reform for the next decade. I just quote some of the words here. So we should have market to play a decisive function in the resource allocation. We will reform our fiscal system, stabilize our tax burden, improvement of the tax revenue system, and sustainable social security system, protection of the ecology and environment, implement paid for resource use system, and energy saving. Actually, we have other reasons that why we care about carbon pricing. First thing is our fiscal system is not perfect. We have the whole fiscal problem driven this economic imbalance. So we have a very distorted price signals, especially subsidy on the energy. Based on the EM Paris estimate that we are the top second subsidy country on coal. And also our local fiscal system, we have a pretty high tax burden on capital and value-added tax. We also have, you might learn that we have this single-child policy, so we have a problem with the aging population. I just quote some data on this social security. We already have gap from last year. This year's gap is about 56 billion. Last year was 96 billion, and this is almost doubled, about 156 billion. And most of the gap was actually coming from the fiscal support, which is about 3% of the total tax revenue this year. It should be more next year. We also have rapid urbanization. Right now it's only 50%, but we expect it to increase to 70%. So that means that a lot of people move to the city, and will be more people exposed to the air pollution. We also worry about energy security, and we are also vulnerable to the effects of climate change. So all of these are the reasons that why we care about the carbon pricing. Also, in order to avoid locking the fiscal capital and infrastructure, household consumption lifestyle, and fiscal governance structure, it is very important that we can use some of these market-based instruments like carbon pricing to deal with our fiscal and imbalance solution and deal with our environmental problem. We tried some mandates policy before for the 11th and 12th five-year plan. It turns out very costly. We introduced a shutdown and a blackout just to meet this mandate target, so it's pretty costly. We do some trial program on the cap and trade. I will talk about that later. And we are considering a new round of green fiscal reform that Ian mentioned about the environmental tax reform, which is right now it's just to shift from the levy system to the environmental tax on the pollution, local pollution. But we probably will have a new round of resource tax reform. I think that would be very close to the carbon tax, because we already done that for the oil and gas, and the next step is to put a high tax on coal. We might also raise the gasoline tax. So these are potential tax reform. So first, I wanted to just to introduce what's going on right now for China's pilot emission trading. As you can see, Asia is actually pretty active in introducing the emission trading. And in China, we have our pilot system. We have 5 cities, 2 provinces. It covers about 7 to 10% of our total carbon emissions. Interestingly, that this morning I found in the newspaper that it's another, the 8th city, Qingdao, was planning to have its own emission trading. It's voluntary. So this is the first one. I don't know whether it will extend to other cities or not. So that's pretty interesting. So as you see, you can see all these 7 cities and provinces are quite different in terms of their threshold on the emission coverage and on the sector coverages, and also how they compute the grandfather emissions. So it's quite different. I think the central government wanted to see which one actually did this successfully, then they might take into account in the national regime. I wanted to show you some of the data. So the first one was Shenzhen. You can see that there's some periods the price is very volatile. I don't know why. Part of the reason might be because of the design, because they allow the individuals to enter the market. So some of these individual speculators, when they enter the market, they wanted to, so the price might be very volatile. But after early this year, it seems quite stable, and the trade flow seems good, but the daily volume is pretty low. The next one was Beijing. The price about 50 yuan or to 60 yuan. The price seems pretty stable. And also Shanghai is about 20 to 40 yuan. Is also that's very few trade. The Tianjin is also looks like also not quite volatile. And this one is from Guangzhou. It's very it's interesting. Is it's a little trade, but for each trade the volume is pretty big. And this is a Tianjin. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry. This is not Tianjin. This is the Hubei. Sorry, I forgot to remove that. So Hubei's case is pretty interesting because it just starts trading 1 month ago. It turns out that the price is the lowest, about 20 yuan, but for each trading, the volume is very big. So just to put all the 6 regions together, you can see I converted to the euro. So it's about from 3 euros to about 9 euros. So it's for some cities even higher than the EU ETS price. And the price is actually higher than we expect in the beginning, because when we simulate carbon tax, it's pretty low. But this is just a marginal tax, this marginal tax trading. So. And another thing interesting, when I calculate the daily traded volume, if we compare with all the other global market, EU ETS or US REGI markets, the daily trade is very little in terms of volume. But Hubei is quite odd that nobody knows what's going on there. Actually, they have a big threshold. If I show you guys that their threshold is if your annual emission is beyond 120,000 tons, you're involved. So much higher, like for instance, like Shenzhen is only 5,000 as a threshold to enter the market. So the threshold is already very high, and so I don't know what's going on there. So the daily volume is too high. But this is only 1 month, so we don't know what's going on later. Okay, so summarize on China's pilot trading. Now it covers about 1 billion tons of CO2, roughly 10% of China's total emission. It covers energy-related sectors, buildings, some include transportation, harbor, and aviation. It includes the direct emissions from combustion and indirect emissions, basically from the this embedded emission from electricity. The coverage threshold varies a lot, from 5,000 to 120,000. The initial allocation, virtually they are almost all grandfather-free allowances, except Shenzhen has a very tiny number of allowances auctioned. The historical emissions computed differently. Beijing, Shanghai is from 2009 to 2012. Some are from 2010 to 2012. The reason for some of these cities that choose a little bit later is because they say, because 2008 and 2009 are crisis, and they don't want to have they have lower emissions, so they want to have a higher emission, so they negotiate with the government. The allocations were distributed annually for Beijing, Tianjin, Hubei, and Guangdong, but Shanghai and Shenzhen, they issued allowances just once at the beginning of for the whole 3 years. So the perspective for the nationwide emission trading, it looks like the earliest timeline will be after this pilot period. So it will be the earliest year might be 2016. It's all depends on the success or failure of the bottom-up design pilot programs, but there are some regulatory barriers. For instance, so far we still don't have a national law specified mandates for establish a national level market. The enforcement is also pretty weak. The fine is only 10,000 yuan to 100,000 yuan per enterprise. It's pretty low. You know, with this money, you cannot even buy a bathroom in Beijing. So it's just nothing. There's a lot of challenges about, so you know that we have this plan system and the price signal might not go through. There also this pilot system is, it's all within the city level, so the trade might be too thin and the transaction cost pretty high. And also, it might also cause leakage issues. Yeah, so I don't have time, so I will just go back. And then I wanted to talk a little bit about the green fiscal reform. Right now it's only the plan, but what is forthcoming might be the resource tax. China's coal tax is still the unit-based. It's pretty low. The oil and gas has already converted to added value. Right now it's about 5%. In the law, it said it can be 5 to 10%. So maybe oil and gas can increase to 10%. The coal tax right now is still $0.4 per ton. It's too low. It never changed for many, many years. So this might be also increased to 5 or 10%. That would be a huge number. We also have feed-in tariff and gasoline tax, but gasoline tax is also pretty low right now. It's 1 yuan per liter. We have this, Ian mentioned this environmental tax reform, but right now it's basically to shift from the CO2 levy to the environmental tax and all the other water pollutions. Then we have this discussed about the carbon tax, but we don't know how it interact with whether we call it a resource tax or energy consumption tax or a carbon tax. So we don't know right now. And for the last few minutes, I wanted to share you with some of our study that we work with Harvard China project. So we use our integrated model with the economic CG model and bottom-up emission inventories and a global model with this fine grade of China's atmospheric modeling, and then we calculate the public health damages. We run different simulations. Some of the simulations that they mentioned yesterday about whether to lump sum to household or give this rebates to the enterprise, or whether we give this subsidy on these energy-intensive trade-exposed industries, or whether we have this border tax adjustment. So we run all these scenarios, and then we compute the ancillary benefits. It turns out for the PM 2.5, we have all the reductions across the whole China, but for ozone, it's for near Beijing, we actually have a loss in terms of the agriculture. But overall, the ozone is a benefit if we sum all the areas. And it just to show our result is impact on the macroeconomic is not that big, but the impact on the environmental benefits are huge. And we also try this, compare with the lump sum transfer to the household or give the rebates to the enterprises. Give the rebates to the enterprises, they were increase compared to the lump sum transfer to household. The scale on the production is a little bit larger, but it's only like the second digit, so it's nothing. But it's much easier politically. We also think about just like the U.S. Waxman market bill. We adopt the same rule here for China to give the subsidy to the energy-intensive trade-exposed sectors, but we give them updated output subsidies. So. That's also a similar results, big co-benefits. So we have some where we get the revenue, it's interesting how we spend it. This kind of study is rarely studied. You can, mostly it's put in the general budget to put the money, invest money on the R&D, low carbon technologies, or recycle with other taxes like we did. It could be also providing some special funding for the feed-in tariff to support renewables. There are also some other fiscal support, for instance, to fill in the gap on the social security, or like to fill in the gap on the local debt, or yeah, so these are some of the areas for the spending, but very few literatures on that. Just to summarize that, we find out the impacts of carbon taxes could be a potent multi-pollutant strategy. We have substantial co-benefits. The carbon tax revenue might help with the tax reform goals. It also shows a win-win solution. Double dividend might exist for China because our fiscal system is quite distorted. More political feasible policy like giving subsidy to EITE and household lump sum transfer might get more support and have smaller environmental benefits, but the difference is pretty small. Using the if we fully compensate the enterprises, so I also did a back of envelope simulation to simulate national trading. For instance, if you take the Beijing rule, say, okay, let's cover 50% of the industry, and let's cap the electricity by 99% based on the historical emissions, and cap all the other sectors by 96%, just fully based on the Beijing emission trading rule. Then the national carbon tax I computed is about 19 yuan per ton for carbon dioxide, which is a little bit lower than our benchmark scenario, which we have about 21 yuan per ton CO2. Then we will get the same result. So in practice, we probably, it depends on how the high-level leadership think about that. But if we don't want to mess up with People's Congress, then we can just do a revision on resource tax. So we can raise the resource taxes on coal. Then we will probably get similar results. Another thing is about the incidence. Another thing about yesterday, we talked about all this informal market. I think it's important to mention that because China, we have a big problem about the tax evasion. Actually, people said, okay, our income tax is only the middle class tax is on the labor, but the rich people can always avoid that. So this might be a good thing that it can increase the tax base. So Anthony and Anthony Liu has this paper on about China. They say, okay, China, India, these are the big, two big countries with a big tax evasion problem. So I just compute about we start for tax evasion about 157 billion in 2011. So this may be a good way for us to introduce carbon tax. And another thing is about tax incidence. I did something on the gasoline tax. It shows that China's gasoline tax is pretty progressive in China. That makes sense because only rich people have cars. So it might be easier just to implement a very high gasoline tax. For the poor people, they don't have car, and they have some indirect consumption related to public transport, but it is very little. So we compute the sales index is about 0.35 with a direct gasoline consumption is about 0.20 with both direct and indirect. I also did some work following Gilbert and on the tax incidence for China's carbon tax. It shows that we have a regressive result, but if we do some low income tax credits or transfer program, it's very easy to just convert it to a progressive. But then the thing is, okay, now we have the political issue, how we already have the emission trading, and we have all these kind of pieces of this resource tax. Then the thing is how we are politically combine, these two instruments together, what kind of the coverage and whether we have double counting and how the enterprises complain about that, and then what is the ultimate outcome. So that is still a big puzzle. Okay, thank you.